Welcome everyone to our UB UBMS APR webinar. Glad you could join us. My name is Lisa Ritamoso, and we have with us Lourdes Maria de Zavala, and I would like for her to cover initially, just for a few minutes, the digital signature piece that we're all required to do no matter what TRIO program we're with. Thank you.
Great. Well, so one of the biggest questions that we typically get is what changes are we going to find in the annual performance report? And knowing that there's not been any changes in the Higher Education Act, we can, though, anticipate that there will be one major change, and that is with respect to the digital signature. For those of you who've submitted in the past, you know that we have typically, once we've submitted our annual performance report, we've been able to download a signature page, which we would then seek out our certifying official and ask them to sign it, and then we would upload it to the APR website. Well, that is gone. The new process that we will be conducting this year with respect to a signature and certification of our annual performance report is going to come by way of an electronic signature, hence this digital signature. With the SSS, they're already implementing it, so we can anticipate that we're going to see it throughout the remaining APRs. So what do we need to do to prepare? Well, first of all, we need to know who is our certifying official. And so right now, as you can see on the screen, we're sharing with you the digital document that's being shared with the SSS community. And so if you can, right now, I would spend even the next week, because we're anticipating the APR for Upward Bound is going to go live in December with possibly a January due date. And when the APR website goes live, you're going to receive a letter that is going to explain. So the letter to the directors is going to explain this new digital signature, and you'll see something similar to this document. Essentially, you can spend this week and even prior to the APR going live by determining who is your certifying official. That certifying official is somebody most likely that, if you're getting communication from the Department of Ed, is currently getting a CC. But if you're not sure, you can check G5. You can also send a quick email message to your program specialist and say, hey, is this my certifying official? If you decide to wait, then one thing that will happen is that per this document and what we're currently seeing with SSS is that you will log into the trio.ed.gov, the director will, and click on the login. The director will have to log in to login.gov, and this is a procedure that was set up last year. So if you're new and this is the first time that you will be submitting the APR, you'll want to make sure that as the director that you currently have a login.gov. You'll notice per these instructions, and Lisa has shared this document with you, you'll need to sign in with login.gov. If you don't have one yet, you'll use this same login.gov and click on the create a login.gov account. This will allow you to set up your duo authentication. But once you log into APR website, the director will be prompted to identify, is this the certifying official for your project? If it is, then you can click on yes, and you'll be able to continue on with the APR submission. If it is not the certifying official, then you'll need to select no, and then you'll need to fill out a form where you will identify your certifying official. Now, just because you fill out the form doesn't mean that you're okay. That is going to submit a form that your program specialist has to approve. And so in the meantime, though, you'll fill out the form and you'll be able to continue on with working with the certifying official, with the annual performance report. In the meantime, if you are still trying to find out who your certifying official is, you'll also have an option to say skip. And if you choose skip, this will allow you to continue with the APR. It doesn't mean that you're set, that you still have to identify who your certifying official is. This is just allowing you to immediately be able to access the APR web system without having your certifying official identified. You will, however, have to complete that process before you can fully submit your APR. Now, if you fill out this form, it's going to go again to the contractor, who will then forward that message to your program specialist for approval. So the contractors cannot give that person access until your program specialist has approved the individual that you are wanting to certify. Once the certifying official is set up, then they will receive notification that they are the certifying official and that they need to be aware of the need to have a login.gov account and permissions set up so that they can log in once your APR is submitted, to be able to log in to click on submit and certify that your APR is correct. Now, again, do not wait until the very end to do this. Once the APR website goes live, make sure that you log in immediately and complete this process. We're having a few folks notifying us, even with SSS, that they're struggling to get their program specialist to respond quickly enough for them to be able to submit. So please don't let that be you. If you try to fill out the information on your certifying official, the tool may also come back and say to you, we don't have a certifying official designated. So you'll need to click on designate the certifying official, fill out the form, and then again, that's sent to the contractor, who will then forward it on to the program specialist. Okay, but no, you have to complete that process in order to get your certifying official set up. A change in this designation of getting approvals by your certifying official is also eliminating the 5-day period that you have to upload and get this certification. You now will only have 2 days once the APR is submitted to get the certifying official to submit their signature. So how is that going to happen? Well, in the past, the director or the individual that is submitting the APR would click on the submit button. And one suggestion that we have is that even before you hit submit, preview your PDF and use that PDF so that you can forward it on to the designated certifying official and indicate this is the APR that's being submitted. Please preview this, because if you need any kind of approvals from them before you hit submit, and for you also to carefully review the annual performance report and your prior experience report, then at least you will have an opportunity to review that carefully before you submit. This will also allow you to then say, okay, I'm in agreement with what I already understood in submitting this APR, and allow the certifying official to be aware in advance of what's being submitted. Because once you hit submit, the director will be able to also certify and say, this is correct, to the best of my knowledge, that the information I'm submitting on this APR is correct and readily verifiable. Once the director submits, it will send a message to the certifying official to indicate the APR has been submitted by the director. We now need you, the certifying official, to log in using their login through the TRIO.gov website and log in and indicate their response for their approval, giving their digital signature. When the signature is needed and or any of the individuals is signing in, they will see something similar to this. They'll see, these are 3 different examples. The first one is for example, is that this is pending. APR has not been submitted because the project director is needing to submit their digital signature. The second is an example of when both the certifying official and the project director have approved. And then the third example here is when the certifying official logs in and can see that only the project director has provided their signature. So please share this document with your certifying official so that they are aware of what is coming their way. They will receive the email, but this document will provide them some of the instructions of what they need to do to make sure that they're able to log in and certify that the APR has been submitted. This next slide is something that you will see at the end of the APR submission process. For those of you who've submitted in the past, you'll notice that you have the opportunity to preview the PDF. And that's the one, again, that I mentioned earlier that I recommend you preview carefully to determine whether you have met your numbers, whether the report is reading the prior experience points, and then for you to download your data. You'll notice that down at the bottom, it has changed slightly to allow the director to click on approve. And this will mean that the APR has been submitted. Lisa, is there something that you wanted to mention?
No, dear, there's no questions so far. There's no chat right now. I imagine it's because, by the way, this document is in the Google Drive, so you can see it in detail. And I think number one, I think more people will, once it becomes live, I think it'll be a real hot topic. But we're encouraging you to go ahead and check this out. And number one, find out who is going to be your certifying official. Lourdes, can they can't actually do this until the website opens up, but they can do all
that is correct, Lisa. You will not be able to see this until the APR website goes live. And so even this particular slide, you will not see till the APR is submitted. You'll notice up at the top in the green title bar, it says APR submitted. And so now the director can say, okay, I'm approving this submission and giving my signature. But even before you see that APR submitted, you'll see a similar slide. You'll see a similar screen where you can download the PDF and the data. Okay, it's important to preview that carefully again because that PDF does not show you what you understood and what you interpreted in terms of the prior experience points that you're earning. Then the only opportunity you'll have at that point is to work with the help desk to ask them to unsubmit your data. And so we want to try to catch that before you have to do additional steps. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Lourdes, for that. So it will definitely be a hot topic soon, but we urge you to, one less thing to worry about, if you just go ahead and become familiar with this document at least, right? And start finding out who's important, so you'll be ready to go, and it should be the first thing you do, and then you go back to wrapping up your APR. So what we're going to do now, Lourdes, if that's okay, no one has any questions, and I think we talked about, well, someone does have a question here. Can we, is there a link for the Google Drive materials? Yes, Donna, it was put earlier, but if you just joined us, you might have missed it. Plus, it was in your confirmation for this webinar. It's that same link there, but I'll ask Donna to put it in the chat. And then there's something quick about, can we double check our certifying official on our most current GAN, correct? Oh, wait a minute.
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. And just FYI, we are probably going to end up doing, thank you, Donna, for that link. We're probably going to end up doing a webinar just on the certifying official digital signature, but that'll be separate. We'll post it on the blog, let you know when that's available so you can attend it or register so you can get the recording. And Lourdes, can you make this a little bit bigger if you don't mind?
Sure.
Then we're going to dig into the draft. This is something that Lourdes kindly has prepared. It's not the official 23-24, but it's based on the 22-23 instructions. Everything in red has been updated, and I'm about to lose my voice. I'm going to turn it over to you, my dear. I'll be answering questions in the Q&A as much as I can. So please put all questions in the Q&A. Thank you, Lourdes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, Lisa. So you'll definitely want to make sure that you're aware who your certifying officials and spend that time wisely now, because there are, as Lisa mentioned early on, you can start working on your data, getting everything ready. Most of the information that we need for the APR is really already ready. So there's no major changes other than that digital signature. So there's really nothing from keeping us from capturing our data and getting ready for the APR. So hopefully, if it goes live in early December, we'll be able to get them all submitted before the Christmas holiday break, and then not have to worry about whether our certifying officials are around for those signatures. But please, start working on these right away. So as we begin thinking about the annual performance report, we know that, we're anticipating it to go live. Now, as Lisa mentioned, we're looking at the instructions, and these are for 22-20. And we've edited. So where you see it in red, referring to 23-24 is our notation, okay? And you know that this says this is a draft because we're anticipating no major changes, only additions to the new reporting period 23-24. Now, one thing I do want to say that 23-24 is our first year out of the 3 years that the department looks at for earning prior experience points. And those years don't change for everybody. So if there's any folks, I don't know if you want to raise your hand, but if 23-24 is your first year of the new grant cycle, because you were funded late, in the last competition, there were some projects that received new funding. And so 23-24 was truly their first year of the grant cycle. Well, unfortunately, if 23-24 is your first year, that doesn't mean you have a reprieve on earning prior experience points. You start the 23-24 with needing prior experience for points for the first year. So it's going to be important that you have a really good understanding for where you are in terms of meeting objectives, because they will count for everybody in 23-24. Even though for some projects, 23-24 might be your first year. But for the most part, the majority of our projects have 23-24 as being their second year in this grant cycle. So if you go out to the department's website, the TRIO programs website, there's a lot of changes in the website. Hopefully you've gone out there and explored it. But if you do click on Upward Bound and you click on the APR tab, unfortunately, the documents there are no links out there. So you almost have to search for these. So I'm really happy that Lisa is providing these for you, because there are no real major changes other than anticipating that we're reporting on the 23-24 reporting period. So the APR has a couple of different sections, sections 1 and section 2. And section 1 is often pre-populated when we do finally get access to the APR website. It's pre-populated with our information, our PR number and the institution and the reporting period. And then there are a few questions that we respond to, whether we are, if this is an Upward Bound program that's needing to respond to question number 8, whether you have a regional or a non-regional program. And then we ask to respond to a couple of questions regarding our project characteristics. How long, if we have a summer residential, or was it non-residential, the number of weeks our summer program, if we have a bridge program, and how often we meet with our participants. Another question will allow us to respond to who is our data entry person. Now, when you log in, and for those of you who are new, if you have someone that is your data entry person, you will be able to log in, once you go to trio.ub.gov and once you do your login.gov permissions, you'll be able to identify a data staff entry person. And so you'll be able to click, fill out a form similar to the certifying official form, although this is going to be who your data entry person is, and you'll submit it. Your data entry person will get an email message that says you now have permission to the APR website. All data entry persons also need a login.gov account and need to set up their dual authentication before they will be able to access the website. But you'll notice that in the web tool, you'll be able to identify who that person is. Your letter, and once the actual forms get submitted, then you'll see some changes right here. For example, I've highlighted the 5 days. Well, we know we will no longer have 5 days. And we also know that there will be no printing and getting signatures that we have to upload. So we can anticipate that the final document, when it comes out, will be modified to remove this information, because we will be having in place the information regarding the digital signature. What is important, though, is that we'll continue to see the certification and warning that indicates that we are, to the best of our knowledge, providing the best information we can regarding this annual performance report. And any of the details that we will include in an Excel file where we will tell them about who those students are that have participated in our program and their outcomes. In section 1, part 2, it says if applicable, but we know that in order to get funded, we had to respond to the competitive preference priorities. So for the majority of us, we have to respond to the CPPs. In the first CPP, and for those of you who are continuing, you can also look at what you submitted last year and then just edit that and then go ahead and reinsert that into the web page. Oftentimes what I do is I will just copy and paste it into a Word document, edit it. I put it in Word so I could do my word count, and then I post it back in here to respond to these CPPs. The first CPP was with regards to the logic model, and we had to indicate that what part of that logic model and or a service that we were going to provide for our participants was implemented and in the impact that might have had for our student success. Again, you'll notice that we have a 500-word limit. So the department wants to know, but they really don't want to know because otherwise they'd give you a little more space or words to write. So short and sweet, what did we do? Was it financial aid that helped us increase the number of students that enrolled in post-secondary ed? Things like that we want to tell them about activities that we engaged in. So definitely take a look at what you wrote in your grants, what you wrote in the APR last year. For the new projects, again, just some tips. Go back, look at your grant, indicate and look at those CPPs and see what did we implement with regards to the services, and write something short and sweet here. For CPP2, again, here we responded to the competitive preference priorities, and we wrote about providing multi-tiered systems of supports. So what were some of those activities we engaged students in to help them meet those social, emotional, and academic needs? Again, short and sweet, 500 words or less. And then our last CPP was with regards to encouraging or strengthening cross-agency coordination and community engagement. So again, what do we do with the different programs? Maybe those who are sending students to us and that, that we're working to provide students with any services or resources that they need out in the community. Again, short and sweet, 500 words. What did we write? But again, always refer back to your grant because you would have defined in detail then what you were anticipating that you would engage students in. Again, for the majority of us, we wrote for those CPPs and we earned prior experience points enough to get us funded. So, so we were now being asked to respond to what it is that we integrated for those competitive preference priorities. When you get to part 3, section 1, information on our target schools, it's important to note that in this section, we're going to tell them the number of students that were served by each of our target schools. We'll also have an opportunity to identify the number of students that were served outside of our target schools. For example, if we recruited within our target area, how many of those students were not at a target school? Oftentimes, if we're a continuing project, we may have had students that moved from one target school to another target school. And we continue to provide services to those because those students were still actively engaged in receiving our Upward Bound services. And so here they're asking about the number of students that we served, how many were served within the target schools, and how many were served outside of our target schools. In this particular section, there will be a web form where you will respond to various questions. So for example, you'll see a listing of your target high school. You'll click on edit. It should be pre-populated with the schools that you were funded to serve. And you'll simply click on edit and then you'll edit the number of participants that were served at that school. It's important to note that this particular process does not allow you, even though it might say, do you want to add a school? It is not asking you to add a school that you are requesting permissions to serve a new target school. That's considered a change in scope. And so this is not the process to be able to do that. Here, we're simply indicating that these are the students, the number of students that were served by each of the schools. You'll notice that if you do try to add, you're going to also be asked the question. You'll receive that indication, first of all, that this is not the pre-approval for it, but you'll also be asked, was this a school that was listed on your application that you had approval to serve? You'll also be asked to identify, again, the number of participants that were served. And you'll notice here, just below the table, it says how many students were served that did not attend a target school. The number of students that you identify within the form for each of the schools, plus the number of students that were not served at a target school, should total the number of students that you indicate were served in 23-24. The department will use that information to determine whether you met substantial progress and or whether you met at least 90% to earn any prior experience points. So remember, you want to make sure that both of these numbers total the number of students that were served. Let's go ahead and begin reviewing the record structure. For many of us, and for those who've submitted annual performance reports in the past, you know that we submit an Excel file. And in most cases, we submit an Excel file because there are other ways that you can upload your information to the web tool. One of those includes using the web tool itself. The web tool, when the website goes live, you'll have an opportunity to download an Excel file that will include all of the participants that you must report in the record structure that you upload. One of the options that you have is to use that download file from the APR website and use that within the APR web tool and simply use the web tool to update your data. Many of us use that downloaded file to compare it with our own databases, and many of you indicated you're using Student Access or TRIO or Boolean. And we use that downloaded file to make sure that everybody that we are accounting for has a 23-24 record to show that they will show in the exported file that we get from our data tool that will be updated in the web in our own databases. We will create an Excel file that contains all of these fields within this record structure that is then uploaded to the APR website. This record structure is really a story about every one of our students. There are different column database names that our Excel file has to have, and we tell them and include all of those records for those individuals on the downloaded list, plus we add any new students or transfer students who might have been served in 23-24. And then we have one Excel file that gets uploaded and it responds to not just these records and the responses that we have for each field, but it responds to those objectives that will allow us to earn prior experience points. We know that we have different fields of data that allow us to capture information for particular students and to identify what we often refer to as denominators, or groups of individuals who will be assessed for meeting particular objectives. As we begin going through this record structure, we'll hit on some of those objectives so that we can see how is it that the department and this web tool using our responses within this record structure to determine whether we met particular objectives. Thank you for continuing to add any questions. Lisa's fielding some of those, but as we go through these, we'll make sure that we hit on your questions, but we do want to get through all of the fields because we have 67 fields of data and we have less than an hour to do that. So we want to make sure that we understand every one of these fields.
And put it in the Q&A, put in the Q&A like Lourdes says, so I'm typing away furiously because I don't have to speak when I type and I can keep my fingers are okay. My voice is out.
So, wonderful. So let's go ahead and begin these looking at these fields of data. So the first three fields of data are really with respect to the record structure. Most of the information that we will be submitting is dropped into this APR website. And if you think about it, it's a mainframe database where all Upward Bound data is aggregated, and then the department uses our data to not only analyze our own objectives, but to run their own reports, their GEPRA, Government Performance Results report, to determine where all Upward Bound projects as a whole are doing. And so the first record, PR, allows, when these records are dropped into this mainframe, to identify where is this record coming from. So every one of your records should have your PO number, your project identification number, and this comes from your grant award notification. For continuing projects, of course, you'll use the PR number that you reported last year. But for those of you who may have had maybe an additional year previously, and truly 23-24 is your first year because you had an extra year from prior funding, or if you're new, then you'll have a new PR number. So always make sure you look at that grant award notification and that you are properly reporting the PR number for this APR. If you are a new project, then because 23-24 is your first one, your first APR that you're submitting, then again, that PR number that you download from the G5 system or G6 will give you that number. So again, please make sure that you are noting the correct PR number. In field number 2, batch AY, for every one of our records, we will have a 2023 batch AY, as this data will correspond to the 23-24 reporting period. In field number 3, type, here you'll indicate, is my project an Upward Bound project or is it an Upward Bound math science? And so all of your records will have either a 1 or a 2. Field number 4 is the case number. Many years ago, we moved away from providing Social Security numbers, and the department began providing us the case number for every one of our students. As you prepare this Excel file for upload, all of your new and your transfer students will not have a case number. So you will leave that field blank for any new or transfer students. All of your other students should have a case number that was assigned and provided for you last year when the APR was submitted. For any project newly funded in 23-24, all of your records will be uploaded without a case number, and the case number will be assigned at the conclusion of your APR submission. Now, the case number is important because you should not change it. If you make a mistake, when you submit your APR file, this Excel file, to the department's web tool, you're almost doing 2 submissions. The first submission is an initial submission to see if the file is accepted. If you have erroneously left somebody off of the list because the case number is not there, or the case number has erroneously been changed and is not correct, your file will not be accepted, and you will receive an email a message indication that says you're missing these individuals. It will also tell you whether the case number, whether information regarding a student's cohort has changed, and you will not be able to proceed with the transmission until the file is corrected and these case numbers are correct. So please be careful with this case number. You'll notice that these first few fields of data have, and especially the case number, and then the next few have a check mark in this first column. And what that means is that any information that has previously been submitted by you cannot change. They often refer to that as the UB system of records. And I used to wonder, like, what's the UB system of records? And the message says, this file that you're trying to upload does not match your previous, it does not match the system of records. Well, what they're saying is that this file that you're trying to submit does not match what you previously submitted. So the UB system of records is your prior submitted records. So that's what the message is indicating to you. I know sometimes if you're new and you see that message, it gets overwhelming because you don't know what to do. So that's essentially what they're saying. is that this file you're trying to submit doesn't match what you're saying for you. The next few fields of data allow us to begin identifying who our participants are. And if you think about these 67 fields of data, it's really a story for every one of these. So we'll often see, for example, that the first few fields of data, like, let me look at my list here. So fields 1 through 3 are about the program. Fields 4 through 51 are really participant information about, who the student is, their first name, last name, their date of birth, why were they selected to be a participant in the Upward Bound program or the Upward Bound Math Science program, and then some information about their educational outcomes. In fields 52 to 56, we begin telling the story about the post-secondary enrollment for the students. Where did they enroll in college? And then in fields 57 through 67, we begin telling them about the degrees that were earned and whether they helped us meet particular objectives. So you can see that this Excel file is simply an Excel file with different column headers and different rows with records for each one of our participants and telling them about who participated, why they were selected, allowing us to count for who was served and whether we were in compliance with respects to eligibility, and then the outcomes. So this is essentially the story that we're gathering with this Excel file. When we begin looking at fields number 5 and 6, we can see that we're telling them the last name, the first name, and the middle initial. Again, we're not changing any information if we've submitted a previous APR. In field number 8, we're telling them the date of birth for our student. And again, we're not changing that information. The next few fields of data allow us to respond to some demographic information regarding the student's gender and their race and ethnicity. When we're submitting records for new participants, we often see that we'll get some error messages when we get to the race and ethnicity fields. For new participants, the department, because they implemented this several years ago, that they want us to indicate the race and ethnicity for participants. And if they're new, they don't want us to put no's for every one of these fields. And so you will get an error message if you try to do that. They're wanting, again, for you to have implemented their policy for determining race and ethnicity. Sometimes you'll have to decide, am I going to use observation or can I leave this blank? And one of the things is that you can leave it blank, but please know you will get an error message because it's wanting you to fill it out. But you still can go ahead and, if you don't feel comfortable with using observation, is to still continue on with the submission, knowing that you will have gotten some errors, okay? The next few fields of data are critical fields because these allow us to respond to our compliance with respect to admitting students into our program that are both first generation low income and or low income first generation and at high risk. So you'll notice within field number 16, we can identify with respect to the documentation we've received by our students and their parents to indicate whether the student is first generation low income. You'll notice that options 4, 5, 6, and 7 allow us to respond to an at-risk factor to indicate that students in our Upward Bound program were brought into the program because they have a factor that is putting them at academic risk and at academic failure, meaning that they're going to struggle more academically because of these factors. The first of those factors is being at risk because they are not proficient in reading and language arts. The second risk is, I'm going to go ahead and get to that slide here, is with respect to having a low GPA. And here we consider a low GPA of a GPA of 2.5 or below. And then the last at-risk factor is the student, if they were admitted by the 10th grade, had they successfully completed algebra. You'll notice that those 3 risk factors, if any one of those are selected, then in our eligibility CD field number 16, we must choose option number 4, 5, 6, or 7. This is one of the most common errors that are made on the APR because if you indicate an at-risk there, but you don't indicate eligibility CD factor here of 4, 5, 6, or 7, then you will get an error and the web tool will force you to go back and say, oh, okay, here's the correct eligibility for this participant. So I think another thing that's important to know is that oftentimes within this record structure, there are some responses from one field that rely on your response to another field. So you want to be very careful about those because they often trip you up in the APR web tool. And sometimes you'll get an error message and you're trying to figure out like, what is really the issue here? But these factors, at-risk factors, cause a lot of problems with coding eligibility CD. An additional error that you will get is with respect to the need and why the student was selected to participate in your program. In evaluating, and we'll get to that field next, but in evaluating the participants that were served and whether you are in compliance with respect to serving students who are both first generation, the department will look at, and the web tool will look at, how many of participants did you indicate were served, and how many of those did you respond with the value number 1, low income and first generation, and the number of students that were option number 7, low income, first generation, and high risk. That number, the sum of number 1s and the sum of records number 7, divided by the number of participants served, will help the department determine whether you are in compliance with 2/3 of your participants being first generation low income. Now, it is important to note that oftentimes Upward Bound Math Science, even though you do not have this at-risk criteria, oftentimes you say, well, that was one of the reasons why I noticed that they were at risk because they didn't have, they weren't proficient. But even though you're not required to report, and if in the APR you indicate that the student has an at-risk factor, then you still have to respond with one of these options, 4, 5, 6, or 7, because the tool itself is acknowledging that you're saying they're at risk. Okay, so even though you are in an Upward Bound Math Science program and you do not have this at-risk criteria for participant selection, but the web tool, once you start trying to indicate students are at risk, will ask you to respond accordingly using these appropriate responses. So those are the at-risk criteria. In field number, let's go ahead and get to this. We'll get to this other field where I'm referring to need. In field number 20, here they're asking is if the student at the time of selection was had a limited English proficiency. And if they did, you would respond accordingly. In field number 21, if the student was considered disconnected because they met any of the definitions regarding a disconnected youth, then they want you to respond accordingly. Field number 22 is the field that I mentioned that often gets an error message in conjunction with the eligibility and the at-risk factors. You'll notice that in field number 22, here they're asking the question about why was the student selected to participate in your Upward Bound program? And you have a number of different selection criteria that you can respond to. And these are some of the most common reasons when we've admitted our Upward Bound students. But you'll notice that option number 16 indicates that the need was identified in one of the at-risk factors. And so if you brought a student in Upward Bound and indicated, and even Upward Bound Math Science, and you indicated the student was at risk for a standardized test, for GPA or test scores, anything like that, then you must respond with an option number 16. If you try to say, well, they're from a predominantly low-income community, it will give you an error because it's saying, no, you already told us in field number 17 through 19, one of the at-risk factors, that this was their highest need and the reason we brought them in. So please be careful with that. Again, that is one of the most common errors that is made on the APR. Field number 23 is the National Center for Education Statistics website and the target school number. So every school has an assigned number, except for sometimes we find new schools and or parochial schools don't have a number. And so you want to list the number from the website, or you can use one of these values listed below to identify your target school. Now, this is the target school at the time of selection. If a student moves from one target school and you've already reported it to another school, you do not have to update it. So again, they're asking about the target school number for when the student was recruited. Field number 24 is asking us to respond to when was the student first served by our Upward Bound program. And so it's not, even though the field is kind of titled project entry date, they're really asking you about the date of first project service. The department, we mentioned, uses our information to sometimes run their own reports. And one of the questions from a report they did many years ago was trying to assess how long a participants in Upward Bound, how long, and their success measures, for example, enrolling in college and degree attainment. So here we want to provide when was the student first served in our Upward Bound program. Field number 25, here we're responding about the student's grade level at the time of first service. Again, you can see that we have some various responses that allow us to indicate, whether the student was in a particular grade or whether the student was a rising, for example, option value number 8 is allowing us to respond to that the student was a rising 9th grader, so they participated between the 8th and the 9th grade. So please use these responses according to that date that you've indicated. The web tool often causes and gives you errors when you indicate, for example, that the student entered a particular date and that whether this was the summer they participated, and other responses that you might have with other fields. So please be careful about this, because again, this is a really common error. Look at the date that the student entered and where was the student with respect to their grade level. Field number 26, deceased, allows us to respond to participants and whether they were a current participant or whether they were a prior year participant, and to indicate whether the student became permanently incapacitated or deceased. This field allows for particular students to be removed from denominators when we're looking at the measurement for objectives. If participants, for example, are from a particular cohort and they've earned a degree, then we want to be able to count that degree towards a successful outcome for us, even if the participant might be permanently incapacitated or deceased. If a current participant becomes deceased, then they will count for our numbers, but they won't impact our objectives also. So this is a very important, even as unfortunate as it might be when we use participants. But it does keep the project, that opportunity to be able to say, well, don't count it against us in the event that happens. Field number 27 is a critical field. And just like eligibility is a critical field, Part CD is a critical field, because this field allows us to identify whether a student was served during the 23-24 reporting period. The department will, and the web tool will consider participants who were new, coded as a Part CD equals 1, a continuing participant, coded as Part CD 2, a reentry participant, coded as a Part CD 3, and a transfer student, coded as a Part CD equal to number 6, as the number of participants that are served. So if you imagine your Excel file and you filter using the data filter tabs, you can look at who are my 1s, 2s, 3s, and 6. And when I look at that, my Excel file will indicate this is the number that was served. So for example, if it was 60, and when you filtered it, then I can anticipate that the department is going to say, okay, you met 60. And if you're funded to serve 60, then you have met 100% of the number funded to serve. The department then looks at the number of the eligibility CD and says, okay, out of those participants that you coded as 1, 2, 3, or 6, how many of those participants were both first generation low income or both first generation low income and at risk to determine whether you are in compliance. Now, a reentry participant is different than a continuing participant because oftentimes a reentry participant may have participated in 1 year but did not participate in your program in 22-23, but have now returned and received services in 23-24. And a transfer student is someone who was in another Upward Bound program, has now transferred to your program as a new transfer and is being served within the 23-24 reporting period. So again, we've now told that story about who were those participants, their first name, their last name, and whether they were served within the reporting. You'll also notice that within Part CD, we have an option to include participants who are prior year participants. And the download file from the APR website will include these prior year participants that we must report on. Oftentimes, because they are participants who may still have participated last year, but they're no longer participating in 23-24 who have yet to graduate. It might also include those prior year participants who have already graduated and have enrolled in post-secondary ed, and we're continuing to report on those participants because we're going to report on their degree attainment, whether it's a certificate, an associate's, or a bachelor's degree. Now, even though our APR does allow us to track certificates, those do not count towards our objectives, but they do ask us to provide any certificates that might be earned. And we'll review that when we get to those fields of data. But this is why we would oftentimes include within our Excel file participants who might be coded as a prior year participant. Go ahead and look here. Our next field of data is field number 28, participation level. And here we'll respond to whether the participant was either a prior year participant or whether they were actively a participant in our program in the academic year and during the summer, our academic year and during the summer bridge, our academic year during the summer onlys, during the summer only, and then we shouldn't really have any unknowns because we should know when those participants were served. Now, it's important to note that within the participation level, we may have these various responses because keep in mind that folks who might be joining us, some of us have a September 1 start date and other projects might have a June 1 start date. And so we need to make sure that we're looking at when is our program start date. And so it's going to be very important for you to know that, especially if you're a new participant. I remember that always being the question, well, when did your program start? Because many of the dates and some of the responses with regarding the students entering grade levels are dependent on when your program start date is. I think we have a question by Amy. And Amy, is that a question you want to ask, or do you want to go ahead and put that into the Q&A? I'm going to go ahead and continue, but if you want to go ahead and put that in the chat or you want to put it in the Q&A, then we'll make sure we get to your question. In field number 29, here we're responding to the students' participation and or receiving services from other federally funded programs. You'll notice that you have the various responses so that you can, the student receives services from another Upward Bound, from another Veterans Upward Bound program, Talent Search, Gear Up, or EOC. You'll also have other responses to indicate, for example, a value option number 9 to say this is a prior year participant. I know that's a common error that's made. we might put in part CD field a number 4, but then we leave one of these other options. And so if they're a prior year participant, then we need to put an option number 9 here. But again, one of the things you want to make sure that you're aware of is that when your participant receives services from another federally funded TRIO program, that you are responsible for having documentation to support what services they are receiving from that other program, so that you are not duplicating those services. So again, you can, in the spirit of collaboration, have your participant receive services from these other programs, but you are responsible for knowing what those services are. In field number 30, starting grade level. For this particular field, one of the things that really helps me keep my record straight is to think about that field number 30, starting grade level, is referring to what is that student's grade level in the fall of 23. And then in the next field, field number 30 to 31, to indicate what was that student's grade level in the fall of 2024. Starting grade level and ending grade level are used by the department to determine one of our objectives to indicate, did that student progress to the next grade level or did they graduate? And so we need to show that the student has progressed and or that they graduated or that they have enrolled in post-secondary education for those students who are currently being served, and maybe even our prior year participants. It's important to note that one of the documents, and this is in that documents that Lisa has shared, is that the way that the department analyzes our prior experience points is that students who are progressing to the next grade level, or your 12th graders that might be progressing to a 5th year, are looked at with respect to their grade level and the date that they might earn high school graduation. So it's important to note that you have a really good understanding for how those objectives are being assessed. But again, keep in mind that the easiest way to complete these fields, fields 30 and 31, is to think about field number 30 in terms of what grade was that student in the fall of 23 and in the fall of 24 for field 31. This particular field, at field 30 and 31, also has some conflict that might happen for a new student within the reporting period. And that was one of the fields we looked at earlier, the entering grade level. So please look at the date carefully. And then even though the student might have been brought in, for example, a student who is brought into your program during summer, always think about, again, field 30, about if they were a rising, for example, 9th grader, then what was their grade in the fall of 23? Because if that student, for example, was brought in as a rising 9th grader, then I might code that student as they were in the 8th grade in the fall of 23. And if I brought them into my program in the summer of 24 as a rising 9th grader, then that will clear, because I'm telling that story accurately, that that in the fall of 23, they were still an 8th grader, even though they had not yet even applied for my program. So please be careful with those fields. You'll notice that even within the starting grade level, we have some different options, like, for example, option number 13, because keep in mind that this file is allowing us to respond to prior year participants who were tracking and enrolled in post-secondary education. Okay? So we have to have different options that will allow us to respond to those students. Here we are, field number 31, again, looking at where those students were in the fall of 24. Field number 32 is a critical field, high school GPA. And you'll notice that this particular field does not want us to exceed a 4.0, except for in the event that how the GPAs are being calculated at your school. It's important to note that this is a critical field because it is the field that is being used to determine whether the students are reaching the 2.5 GPA or higher. For participants who are currently being served, so any of those that we code as a new, continuing, a reentry, or a transfer student, minus any students who might have been in the bridge or any rising ninth graders, because we typically code bridge and rising ninth graders with an 8.888 value. But for all of the other students, we want to be able to respond to what their GPA was at the end of the 23-24 reporting period so that it can be assessed. The number of records that indicate at least higher than a 2.5 GPA will be evaluated favorably towards meeting this objective. And so when we don't know the GPA, and so you'll notice that we want to minimize in instances like this when something is unknown, we want to minimize the unknowns because they typically will count against us in meeting an objective. One thing that's also important with respect to particular objectives is that when the department is asking the question and determining your number funded to serve for the APR, that will form the denominator. And you always want to make sure that that number is equal to the number funded to serve. If it's below the number funded to serve, then your number funded to serve becomes the denominator. If you overserve and you go over your number funded to serve, then the higher number or the number of students served becomes the denominator in analyzing your objectives. So it's important to know that the number you serve, again, will help determine who gets evaluated for these particular objectives. Our next field is the high school GPA unweighted. This particular field is one of the GEPRA measures. And so if you have the unweighted GPA, because these are provided on the transcripts for the participants who are served, then go ahead and provide them. Otherwise, go ahead and indicate a 0.00. It's important to note that this particular field cannot exceed 4.0. And again, it is used not for determining your outcome of objectives, but rather it is a performance, a GEPRA performance measure. Field number 34 is a critical field. This field, high school GPA, is used in determining the number of students that graduated from high school with a regular secondary school diploma and enroll in post-secondary education. You'll notice that for students who are continuing to be served, we typically respond with the option number 1 to indicate that they're currently enrolled in high school. But for other students who may have dropped out or received a high school equivalency or met state or local agreements or requirements for graduation, we will use those responses. However, the response that the department is most concerned with is option number 3. For those participants that received a regular secondary school diploma, we will provide the date they received the diploma and report for those individuals who enrolled in college in latter fields. In field number 35, for students who have graduated, will indicate the date of graduation. The department will use this particular file to determine who did we put in field number 43 with the high school grad equal to 3, and look for a high school graduation date within our reporting period to determine a denominator to see how many of those actually met rigorous curriculum and how many of those enrolled in post-secondary education. You'll notice that field number 35 also allows us to respond to participants with the 666 value to indicate the student has not yet graduated, or whether students are 999 not applicable because they're either a high school dropout or they're still enrolled in high school, and high school grad dates of 00 as unknown. this particular field, number 35, along with field number 34, if, for example, we have a student that dropped out of high school, and so if we've responded in field number 34 with a high school grad of equal to a number 2 high school dropout, then in field number 35, if they do not graduate, you can respond with either a 999. But let's say that a student has also completed a requirement, but you don't know when, then, and if you use the 0 values for unknown, then in other fields of data, when we're responding to college enrollment data, we will respond with 8 values to indicate that student has not yet graduated and able to enroll in post-secondary education. We will get to those fields a little bit later, but this is one of the errors that we typically get, that if a student, we do not indicate a high school grad date, that we cannot, within the post-secondary enrollment fields, then indicate that they have enrolled in college. Okay? So remember, the story has to be clear that we can only report a student has enrolled in college if we indicate that they have graduated and we provide a high school grad date. Field number 36 is a critical field, and it's a critical field because it responds to one of our objectives when a student has graduated. Our options here is to indicate that if a student has graduated with a regular secondary school diploma, remember that wording alone ties it back to that high school grad field to say, if the student has graduated with regular secondary high school diploma, and I indicated within the high school grad field in response number 3, then did they complete a rigorous program of study? If transcripts provide response that they did, then I will respond with an option number 1, and this will be counted favorable in determining whether I met my rigorous program of study objective. And option number 2 indicates the student earned a regular secondary school diploma but did not complete a rigorous program of study. Option number 8 is a response that I'll indicate for all other participants. And a 0, of course, is for those participants who graduated, but I don't know if they completed this program of study. But because it is a critical field, any 0 or unknown values for students who graduated, again, will count against us. Field number 37 is a field we no longer use, so every one of your records should have an option number 5. Fields number 38 and 39 are critical fields for students who have graduated. And here that we are being asked, for those 12th graders, on whether those students who've graduated and whether they were proficient in reading, language, arts, and math. The favorable outcomes for both of these fields, and in order to be meeting this particular objective, they have to become proficient in reading, language, arts, and math. And so you'll notice that we have an option number 3 for those students to indicate whether they were proficient in reading, language, arts, and then in field number 39, whether they were proficient in math. Field number 40 is a GEPRA field, and the department is asking the question about whether the participant was completed an AP class or an IB class, and or whether the participant's not applicable because their participant who graduated long ago. Many of those students have already been eliminated from our record structure, so I don't know that we have very many 9 options anymore that we're responding to. Field number 41 and field number 42 are the only fields within the APR that allow us to respond to whether a participant is in the 23-24 reporting period enrolled in a dual enrollment program. A dual enrollment program is an agreement between many of your high schools and the community colleges or colleges in your area for the student to be taking classes that often will count towards a high school graduation. And so here we're being asked whether this participant is engaged in a dual enrollment program and whether they have earned a credential. In field 42, this is the only place where we can indicate whether a student who was enrolled in a dual enrollment program and whether they earned a certificate or an associate's degree. And we need to make sure that as you're thinking about this particular field of data, that if they've earned a certificate or an associate's degree prior to high school graduation, that you indicate that within this field 42. In the latter fields where we're indicating any degrees that might be earned, do not count those high school. You will get an error message again because it is using the high school grad date and the date that you put for degree attainment to say, hey, if you put a date in there that might be before the high school graduation, the error will say you can't have recorded a degree for high school graduation. So again, there is no date that you will indicate here other than a response that they earned a credential while they were in high school. Field number 43 is another GEPRA measure, and here the department is asking the question whether the student has completed a math beyond Algebra 1 in high school. Field number 44 is another GEPRA field, and for students who are graduated, and so you've responded with a high school grad date and given a high school grad field response. Did these students complete the FAFSA? For all other participants that are not high school seniors, you can respond with option value number 8. Field number 45 and field number 46 allow us to respond to students who may have left our Upward Bound or our Upward Bound Math Science programs. In field number 45, we will respond with the last served date. It's important to note that option values number 9 allow us to indicate that it's not applicable because the student is still participating. In most of the cases with dates, if you know the student left your program, you can use the date number 15 if you don't remember the actual date of that last service. Okay? In most cases, we will put into our databases the services, so it's more likely that you do know the actual date rather than having to guess the field, the date. It is important to note that if we are in this Excel file reporting prior year participants, all of those students must have a last served date that is prior to the first date of this 23-24 reporting period. I mention that because, again, that is one of the most frequent error messages that we get. The last served date must be, if they are a prior year participant, before this 23-24 reporting period. It's important to note also that if you have a student who re-entered your program and you had previously in a prior report said they left my program, but now they've re-entered, that you change that date back to the 999 values to indicate that the student has re-entered. Field number 46 is identify some of the most common reasons that an Upward Bound or Upward Bound Math Science student might have left our program. So please choose the appropriate response. You'll notice that we also have an option 99 to indicate that the student is still on our program. Again, if the student left your program, has re-entered, then you can change the reason back to 99, or sometimes you might get an error message if you say the student left my program, but they had re-entered and you put some value here other than 90. So again, remember, some fields trigger errors with others, and you want to make sure that we tell the story correctly.
10 minutes, Lourdes, 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. The next few fields of data are with respect to the services that Upward Bound programs receive. So you'll want to identify whether the student received the service or not. You'll notice that in those fields, prior year participants, we want to respond to the 9 value. Field number 52 and the next few fields of data allow us to respond to when students who've graduated and enrolled in post-secondary ed. Field 52, Self-Tran, wants us to respond to how did we find out and or what was the source that allowed us to respond to that the student is enrolled in post-secondary education. The first enrollment date is when did the student first enroll in that institution. You'll notice that we have a response for the 666 value to allow us to respond to a participant that may have enrolled in post-secondary education but had a deferred enrollment. This field is critical because it must be after, if we decide to enroll a first enrollment date, it must be after the high school graduation date. Again, another common error. That post-secondary enrollment cannot happen until after high school graduation. It's also important to note that participants who have not yet completed high school, we often in the next range of fields use this 888 value. For students who graduated and did not enroll in post-secondary, the next few range of fields, we respond with the 999 values to indicate the student did not enroll in post-secondary. Fields number 54, PSE cohort, is a critical field because this allows us to define a cohort that we will track for 6 years for degree attainment, whether it's an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, in which we will earn prior experience points. When the new instructions come out, we will be following the 2018 cohort to determine the 6-year degree attainment. But we'll also begin identifying our 2024 cohort, or identifying those participants who enrolled in college by the fall of 2024 and or through deferred enrollment in the spring of 2025. Those participants will be placed into the 2024 cohort. So we anticipate seeing that addition to the instructions. Again, you'll notice that we have the 8 ranges and the 9 values. It's also important to note that if you, for some reason, forgot to report somebody in a previous cohort, you can no longer add students to previous cohorts. The next few field data now ask us for information about the institution where the student enrolled. So we'll use the studentaid.gov website to identify the institution codes where students enrolled. The students may leave an institution and transfer to other institutions, but you do not have to update. This is the institution where the student first enrolled. PSE grade level allows us to track the continued enrollment of students who've enrolled in post-secondary ed. You'll notice that for our 2024 cohort, for most of those students, we'll report PSE grade level is that 24-25 is the first year they enrolled in post-secondary ed. For other students who are continuing to enroll, we'll choose option number 3. But you'll also notice that we have other options that allow us to indicate that the students have either completed their education or they've completed their education and are continuing to be enrolled. Perhaps they're working and earned an associate's and now are getting a bachelor's, or working towards getting a bachelor's, or they've attained a bachelor's, maybe continuing to pursue a master's, and so on. We also have option value number 7 to indicate that the student has no longer, either they didn't complete and or they left their program without completing it. You'll notice that we also have an option number 11 to indicate that this is a student who is a deferred enrollment. You can use this information again to help you identify whether students are continuing to be enrolled. It is important to note that if you indicate the student is no longer enrolled here, then in other fields you must choose option values number 7, and then the ending grade level might be also a 999 value to indicate that they are no longer enrolled. Again, keep in mind that some of these fields are allowing us to respond to not only current students, but those prior year participants. Field 57 and 58 allow us to respond to whether students have earned certificates, the dates they earned those certificates, and or whether they're continuing to be enrolled or have left those programs. 59 and 60 allow us to respond to whether participants have earned associate's degree, whether they're pursuing other credentials, or whether they are continuing to be enrolled or have left their programs. Field 61 and 62 allow us to respond to whether participants have earned a bachelor's degree and or have either stopped out, continuing to enroll, or pursuing credentials. Field 63 is a critical field as it allows us to respond to whether participants who graduated in 23-24, whether they enrolled in post-secondary ed or not, or whether they had a deferred enrollment. And then for other students who may have graduated but did not enroll in post-secondary ed. Field 64 is a field for GEPRA, and the department is wanting to determine whether students who enrolled in post-secondary ed, whether they were ready for college level math or English. And so we would respond accordingly. Field number 65 is a critical field as it's allowing to respond to whether our participant who was in the 2018 cohort and whether now, 6 years later, whether they have earned a credential. And whether we will earn prior experience points for that long-term objective. Field number 66 allows Upward Bound Math Science programs to respond to whether the participant who graduated, whether they earned a post-secondary degree in a STEM field. And so we would respond accordingly. Now, we've mentioned that some of these fields of data are asking us when participants might have earned credentials. And we also mentioned that the department runs their own report to determine whether how all Upward Bound projects are doing. And so even though we might learn at first instance, for example, that a student who 2 years ago enrolled in an associate's program has now 2 years later earned an associate's degree, we want to make sure that we include that type of information in this APR because of the GEPRA report that the department is using for this data for. They run their own reports because even though we earn credit for associates and bachelor's degree attainment within 6 years, the department is running their reports. They want to know how many students are earning credentials within 3, 4, 5, and 6 years. And so they're looking at all that data. So if we can provide that data the moment that we hear that they've earned a credential, we will go ahead and report that. But we do know that, for example, in field 65, that group and that credential that they earned will not be assessed until their cohort comes up for measure 6 years later. So we definitely want to make sure that we report it though for those GEPRA reports. The last field of data is field number 67. This particular field of data, because we mentioned that the participant's name, their name, first name, last name, their date of birth, the cohort they were in, cannot change their case number. Those things cannot change. But oftentimes we might have a student who has changed their last name. And this field 67 is where we can indicate that this is the participant name change that we're also tracking them. Do not change, again, any of those other fields, because when you do try to create your file and you try to upload it, and if you've done that, then the web tool will immediately reject your file and force you to go back to fix your file before you can upload it again. Once your file is accepted, it will go through the second opportunity to review your data. And this is where you'll begin seeing error messages. And they must have been English teachers because they put everything in red. And they say, here's your error, you need to fix this. And you will not be able to proceed with your APR submission until you have cleared those errors. Once those errors are cleared, then it will continue to run some additional reports. It will tell you, here's your approved objectives, and this is where you are with respect to meeting those objectives and earning higher experience points. Keep in mind, again, that you need to serve at least 85% to meet substantial progress, and you also have to meet 90% to earn prior experience points. Otherwise, you will not earn any prior experience points in this year, and 23-24 is a prior experience year. So you will see that within your report. The last things that you will see is download that PDF, review it carefully. If everything is as you agreed and know from the APR submission, then go ahead and submit. When you submit, the directors will receive an email message that says you can log in and provide your digital signature. Once the digital signature is provided, it will trigger sending an email message to the certifying official that the APR has been submitted, and for them to log in as well and submit their approval. And this has to be done within 2 days. So do the work, as we said at the beginning, to find out who your certifying official is so that you don't get caught trying to get any approvals. If you're a new director, make sure that you are on the GAN as the director. And otherwise, when you try to log into the APR website, you'll have to jump the first hurdle with making sure that you have permission to get to that APR website. So with that, I think we've reviewed all the fields, tried to give you a heads up. And Lisa, is there anything?
Only you could do this in the time allotted. I would have gone way over. You covered everything so efficiently. I've been answering questions too, and questions are always great. They keep me on my toes, but most of the questions, I went back to the instructions. It's a really good document. They do cover, I gotta hand it to them. The APR is crazy, but on the separate instruction document, which is also uploaded in the Google Drive, if you do a search, which I kind of knew where it was, but I did a search to remind me. And a lot of the stuff I answered, I simply copy and paste it over. So it's there in case you missed it right now. I don't mind answering it all. It just keeps me on his toes. But just in case you want to show somebody else or someone else has that question, it's in the instructions. We have the separate tips, a document for separate tips being it's already developed. So I'm going to do that. Lourdes, we have a question. How long do we have access to the drive to download all the documents? Oh, you better do it right away, I believe. Don't, right? Lourdes, on the website,
Yeah,
I'm
well,
assuming.
yeah, well, so that I think they're referring to your documents.
Oh,
yeah.
to my documents. Okay, thank you, Lourdes, for that clarification.
Yeah.
I'm going to upload the copy of the tips, and the questions are already in the transcript that you're going to get the recording. You'll see the Q&A, I believe, right, Donna, is there, and you can see that. But we went ahead and copied and pasted the tips that I was throwing out during the chat, Lourdes, on a separate document. Donna's already done that. I'm going to upload it. The Google link, you should have it a year from now. It's going to be the same link, but I'm going to switch it out and put information about 24, 25. So it's going to be there forever. Okay. It depends on if you want to download it or just go there and download it when you need it. You can always download and save those documents. Can we put the link one more time, Donna, into the chat? There you go. Thank you. She read my mind, or she read the questions. Better yet. Let's see. I think I answered all the questions. You'll get the recording probably tomorrow afternoon. And let's see, something else. We have the link. I think we have all those answered. Lourdes, some people are asking if they can meet with you. So I asked them to email me directly, and we can arrange something there. But you can always email us at info@nosotros, right? edu.org, or just go to our website, reply there, and we will go ahead and get you in touch and see what Lourdes' schedule is. We also are doing it directly as well. If you want to be stuck with me, I can kind of muck my way through it. But thank you, Lourdes, so much. I think we might have a double check. I think we have answered everything combined with you presenting and me and Donna here typing away. Let me go ahead and stop the recording. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you all so much. Good luck on your